just going to real quickly go over these so you have time to ask questions. So we talked about, this. You've got to find out who's out there and find it. Just, stop with the blinders so you're not overwhelmed, and say, okay, I'm going to be overwhelmed once in a while, but I'm going to find out who's out there working on. I mean, there's hundreds of thousands of networks out there, and if you can start to get some of these, I'd really. And if you want a list of funders that support networks, go to FITO Network. They have a whole section with about 50 funders that support networks. So just FITO, FITO .network, I don't know. Anyway, something like that. So really, the thing about these network weavers, now you may have heard that term, it's about it is not a job, it's not a role, it's something everybody, it's a role, I guess, that everybody in a network can play, and some will play it with more skill and spend more time on it than others, but everybody needs to understand network weaving. And if you don't, there's good stuff in that network weaver handbook thing that about how you explain and talk about that. But these network weavers, you need network weavers in your network that are focused on other networks. Next slide. And go on to the next one, because those are the books that you can, there's other places on the blog that you can learn about this too. And then you've got to really focus on building relationships. And so next slide. What I suggest is, and if you don't know this closing triangles thing, it's really like if you go out and you talk to somebody in another network, you listen to them and you find out what's their challenge, what are they interested in, and you say, oh, I know somebody in my network who's into that too, and you begin to bring them together. So you don't become a hub, but you're starting to bring together people, and you might help them talk to each other so that they start thinking about, oh, well, who else is interested in this? What could we do? Could we get a learning group together to talk about this? And so it's just like magic. All of a sudden, you've got self-organizing starting to happen. So next slide. And so this shift to self-organizing, I'm telling you, this is the piece that is so undeveloped. And I want you to all think about trying to add this to your network as well as networks and networks. It really works for networks and networks. So this is when you connect people, they find something that they want to do together or learn together, and you support them and help make something happen. You learn from whatever it is you do, and you share that with others. So next slide. It's just so basic. Now, yeah, I'm going to skip over this a little bit, but when you bring people together, and this is something network weavers have to be able to do, facilitators of every meeting, they need to be, having breakout rooms where people can get to know each other. They need to practice a healthy culture, a trauma-free culture, a culture where you're going to get listened to, where you're going to support each other, you're going to interact as peers. Next slide. And you can do this. I have a values checklist that's great, where people can take it and they can say, oh, wow, yeah, we're really open to new ideas, but, oh, we do have a little trouble letting go of control. Well, then they get together and say, what can we do about that? And they then get some strategies that can help build that culture. Because without that culture, we're going to keep falling back into competitiveness, into being impacted by trauma, into being angry, or whatever. And so we have to keep helping people move into a culture of caring and support, next, and collaboration. And there's all these microprocesses that some of them are in the handbook that can help people. Every meeting can have these microprocesses where people are encouraged to behave in these really healthy ways. I'm finding that transformation is about small things. It's about people consistently interacting in healthy ways with each other, day after day, and that begins to spread. And we don't have time to talk about that here, but there's ways you can help that kind of culture spread. And that is what can be a big part of, because when you do work and you know how to interact really in healthy ways, you're going to not waste time on, getting bogged down in conflicts that you don't pay attention to. You'll know how to deal with stuff like that, and you'll know how to make that be more like a sneeze than pneumonia. Next slide. So then there's lots of different ways you can assess. You have a couple networks out here now. You have to find these opportunity spaces or interests, and you can use surveys, you can do simple network system mapping, and I've got some resources here, and there's actually people on this call, system innovation and stuff. People can help you with. Next slide. And some of the best work's being done. Anyway, we don't have time for that. Next one. But there's lots of people doing great things on system mapping and then how to identify the networks. So then you can start convening like really small things, like how do I get young people involved? And so get people from 5 different networks who want to get young people more involved. And maybe they meet once, maybe they meet 3 times, maybe they meet for 6 months. You can call it a community of practice or a learning cluster or whatever, but you start bringing people together. And it doesn't have to take a lot of time. You can have a pretty standard agenda. People share. They get support for challenges. It can be a pretty simple process. And then when you get your $1 million, next slide, this whole thing about starting to get, you find, wow, here's a opportunity space where if we got a bunch of people working, we could really start to figure out how to shift this food system or whatever. And so getting people together once a month from maybe all over the world, maybe, all over the country, and getting them to behave in some of these new ways while they're sharing and learning from each other. Again, we need our facilitators and network weavers to really know how to lead learning processes and how to do that. And it's not just about, oh, what went well, oh, what could we change? No, it's digging in and really looking at. We need to spend so much more time noticing what we're doing and figuring out next steps. Okay, a few more things here. We'll get some questions. So this support ecosystem, this is like, I'm a gardener. I have a very little yard, but I have a wonderful garden, and I spend a huge amount of time getting the soil, putting lots of different nutrients in it, and getting my compost that I make and all that. And the plants respond and they really grow like other people. I look at their gardens and they're like little straggly things because they haven't invested in the enabling conditions or the support ecosystem. We've got to start thinking together about this. And we do not have this figured out. But we really need to get, like, what are these new kinds of network weavers that are ambassadors, that are connectors across networks? What does that look like? How do we support them? How can we begin to bring them together monthly? That's a big thing that we need to start with soon. And then the communication ecosystems, and I'm going to let Anna talk about this because we're trying to figure out what does a communication ecosystem that allows us to know what's going on in all these networks and yet be able to not get overwhelmed. Anna, you want to talk a little about this?
Yeah, so me and Christina, we are part of the project called Social Roots. We're co-hosting this event with June. So Social Roots is a software platform that's run as a worker-owned co-op, and we got funded by the National Science Foundation to basically spend about 5 years researching this topic of what is preventing people from self-organizing into networks of networks, and what are the processes and technologies that are going to help. And what we learned was, in a nutshell, that basically most software is built hierarchically, and it's built to have 2 levels of self-organization instead of 3. So if you think about like Slack or project management tools or any sort of chat tools, they're made for one organization to use at a time. They're fundamentally sold to one organization. That's how they build the whole system. And it's a very hierarchical system. And then the second category of technologies out there is kind of social media. So if you think of Twitter and Mastodon and Facebook, And those are built fundamentally as public squares, and their business model is ad revenue. Um, and basically, there's not really a sense of any sort of community space. So then what we've seen communities use is things like portals, forums, listservs, um, and those are working better, but they're fundamentally siloed. And so you can't have that kind of multi-fractal subsetting and supersetting that you have to have agency and be able to scale across. Because fundamentally, there's always one person who owns everything, and one person can delete the whole Slack group, or can delete the whole Facebook group, or can delete the whole portal. And that really makes it hard to get people to feel motivated, because everybody wants to have some control over their work, over their information, their knowledge, their relationships. So basically, what Social Roots is doing, and we invite anybody who wants to join us to to participate in whatever way you want to, but basically we're building technology to break down this paradigm of hierarchy or completely public, and really build infrastructure that enables scaling across, that's allowing autonomous networks of groups to both subset and superset, but with healthy boundaries.
Wow. Yeah, so I think we're going to do some experimenting with it when we work on the workbook that's going to come out of this. Okay, so next slide. Let's go on the next slide. I've got bonus slides. So we will set up like a YouTube channel or something, like a space, the Social Roots YouTube channel, and I will put a link to these slides. You're allowed to take them, edit them, do whatever you want with them. You can attribute if you want to, but some of it maybe you don't want to be connected to. Okay, so then the last piece is just it's so important that we share, so we do something with a networks of networks. It's probably going to be just a very small subset of all those networks. Networks tend to be often big and sprawly. So we have to have ways to really turn what we learn into knowledge and really share it. And we've got to stop using webinars to tell people what we're doing, and instead tell them what we're learning and give them time to figure out how to apply it to what they're doing. I feel like that we have to create these pathways for rippling. I call it, instead of scaling, it's like pathways for rippling or spreading. And we need to learn more about what kind of knowledge is really useful to each other, because I think we put a lot of stuff out there and waste a lot of people's time reading through stuff to get to the little nugget that's really going to be useful for our network. So anyway, that's just another piece of this network of networks piece that I don't want people to forget about. So next slide. I think we're just about, yeah. So next slide. So this is my new sort of model of transformation, very simplified. You can look at this later. And I think that this could make a huge difference in the world. But it really, networks that are connecting is at the heart of this whole model. And so we need to figure out and learn how to know what's happening in that whole network space around the world. So next slide. It's not just networks, it's networks of networks, and all the way up, all the way down.